uh, International Quarantine Car Show, and that was a good deal, and was really kind of interesting thing. But I ended up with this channel, and I thought, well, I'd have some fun with this thing and maybe show you some local stuff. There isn't a lot of local content in our area, so I'm going to start with our small circle of friends here. Now, these two cars I've got in front of me here, one's obviously a 62 Chrysler, and this is a 1 of 7 car. And the one on the rack here, a 67 Chevelle, this is a 1 of 1, so we're starting with two really rare cars here. But first of all, the 62. This is owned by a good friend of mine, Calvin. And now, Calvin, you found this in there's a field car, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you mentioned that you probably wouldn't give this car a second look, but you noticed something kind of unusual about it. And that was this block-off plate in place of where the push-button transmission normally would be. And then a standard transmission, which is not, it's just kind of an unusual for this car.
Yeah, I was looking for a 61 because I'm a kind of a Finn guy. And when the fella mentioned to me that maybe I should just buy that one out there, and I said, well, 62, not really my taste. But when he mentioned that it was a factory standard transmission car, I changed my story very quickly. It had been a field car. It had been sitting actually in a compound fairly well looked after for about 18 to 20 years. But everything was done on it. The engine was stuck. The brakes were destroyed. Everything about it. And I managed to negotiate a reasonable price I could live with to get the car. And my plan was to have it for a few years as more or less a distraction, because my focus was on the Chevelle, but I knew that I wasn't really going to be able to get into that as financially deeply as I knew I was going to have to. So I decided to just kind of play with this and enjoy it for a while, and it kind of ended up being a fixture, and now I'm not really interested in parting with it the more I find out about it. So I'm kind of, I like the odd and unusual cars.
So this one originally had a 361?
Yeah, and I enjoyed it. I nursed it back to health enough that I could drive it for a couple of years, and one day, unfortunately, driving along, I believe I dropped a valve in it and needed a replacement big block. So I just went with a generic 440 because it's what came up. Could have been anything, could have been another 361, but the 440 came along, so that's the way it went.
Yeah, so you did try to save on the original motor, and it had a 3-speed standard.
Yeah.
Originally, so this was a 361 3-speed standard, block-off plate where the push-button transmission is normally. So some odd things about it. Now there were 7 of these made. Can you explain what that was all about? How that came to be?
Apparently, from what I've been told, they were made as demonstrators, not as part of the Enforcer program, but by request from 7 law enforcement jurisdictions in the States. This being a U.S. model, which is kind of unusual that it ended up here in Canada. But that they needed big block standard transmission cars for their highway pursuit fleets. So 7 of these cars, apparently, all identical, white with red interior, 361 3-speed, were built and sent out to the chief or the sheriff or whatever department had requested a demonstrator, and then they were used whatever as that, and then returned to Chrysler once the decision was made either to buy or not to buy. One jurisdiction, for instance, that did buy 62 Chryslers with big blocks and standards as pursuit cars was Orange County, for instance, and that's a verified fact. So I would imagine one of these cars went to the sheriff or the chief of the highway patrol division there.
Right.
So to find this car, it was odd. At that point, they when they were returned to Chrysler, my understanding is they were sold to little dealers throughout the states that were having a little bit of a hard time selling cars, small area, whatever, small customer base, and they were sold for, and you may have heard of the term dollar cars.
Right. Yeah.
My understanding is that they were sold for $1 under the condition that they were put out front on the floor or out on the yard, not in the showroom floor, so that people could see you can own a new 62 Chrysler for as little as. And the fact is, they were so base, manual steering, manual brakes, manual transmission, radio delete, you know, all of the things that would normally make a Chrysler a luxury car, which in this case was not the case. They put out these complete strippers.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
and probably try to upsell people, but this is the one that you could get.
yeah.
So there was a couple of things here. So you mentioned the data plate, where its location, and what.
I've owned 3 of these Coupes 62s. 2 of them were Canadian-built cars, so a Saratoga and a Windsor.
Right.
The Newport, to my understanding, is a U.S. model, and the other ones that I've had both had generators instead of an alternator originally. 62 was the first year of the alternator versus generator for Chrysler, but that was in the U.S. In Canada, they still had generators. The other thing was the data plate on any of the other cars I've owned was on the firewall on the left-hand side, just below the hood line.
Yeah, typical.
Where this one was very unusual in that I found it on the driver's A-pillar.
All right, there we go.
And my inquiries told me that, or the people I inquired with told me that the numbers in that bottom right area, or bottom left area, pardon me, say that it is one of a special order group. Now, there were probably a number of 62 Chryslers built with standard transmissions, but this being one of a particular production run for that purpose of 7 cars. So, kind of neat, and it
Yeah.
sort of grew on me over time.
Yeah, very cool. One thing that continues to just blow my mind is Kelvin and I attend a lot of events together. I bring the Chevelle and he brings the Chrysler, and he can park this thing next to a $200,000 car, and this thing just gathers a crowd, and it's just and especially when he lifts the hood. So now the 361 is long gone. There's a 440 in here, and there's something special to show you here as well. So this is sonoramic long rams. Very cool. Anytime you see multi-carb setups, I get excited. So let's so Chrysler, for those of you that don't know, in the 50s, Chrysler did a shitload of R&D with intake manifolds. If anybody remembers the ramrod with the Ram Chargers, it had the big ton of ram intake with the radiator hose runners. And they used to cut the runners, cut the tubing, and just experiment with that. And this actually made it onto a production car in the early 60s. There was 2 versions, this being the long ram, and then there was a short ram. And I think Kelvin will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the short ones, they didn't have the dividers in the plenum.
Correct, yeah. The short rams were actually dimensionally the same to all the pictures I've been able to find. Just that they had a large single plenum from about this point on to the plenum. So They were a single large runner, and then they were divided from there down to the port, changing the tuning ram tube length and changing the effective peak torque range of the engine. These were rated for 2,800 RPM, which is a great highway passing arrangement, which is what they were built for. Whereas the short rams were more geared towards performance at about a 3,400 RPM.
Right, yeah. Very, very cool setup. And from what I understand, there's a pulse that takes place in these runners, and it would actually help push the intake charge into the engine. Is that correct?
Yeah, it creates, it actually, because air-fuel mixture has mass, it creates a pulse. As the intake valve closes, it'll pulse back towards the carburetor base and reflect back, and at that 2,800 RPM number, that because of the mass, the velocity is such that it reaches and stacks up at the valve just prior to it opening, making these things, apparently they were tested up to about 103% volumetric efficiency.
Wow.
Where your regular single 4-barrel engine, or what have you, even a very well-tuned engine with a perfect camshaft, might put you somewhere into the high 80s to low 90s volumetric efficiency. And normally your daily driver car may be somewhere in the 80s. These were capable of up to about 103%.
Wow, incredible. And this was one of, now this design made it onto a production car, but they did a ton of R&D with intake manifolds, and this was a really cool setup. So whenever he pops the hood on this, I mean, there's a ton of people gathered around this. This is a really neat setup. So I dig it. This is cool.
And surprisingly very economical. It still gets me in the high teens to low 20s for fuel efficiency on the highway.
Wow, 440, big car. That's really good. Really cool. So, you know, some people might be asking, if this is a 1-7 car, why wouldn't he fully restore it? And Kelvin and I have had this conversation, and you know, in Canada, to restore a car like this, which first of all there's not a lot of reproduction parts available. First off, you'd have to really hunt the world for NOS stuff, which is difficult. And the cost in Canada, it's a third or more than what it would cost in the States to, you know, fully restore a car like this. And at the end of the day, you know, it might cost you $80,000 or above that to restore a car like this.
Not particularly economical.
And then you'd end up with an appraisal of, you know, maybe in the high 50s, who knows. But what he's done here, he had a vision, and I really like it. The long rams, the 440. It still retains. Now let's talk about the transmission, because that's a neat story as well. It came with this 3-speed standard originally. Now you were able to acquire a bell housing that helps you adapt a 4-speed GM. Was it a Saginaw?
Yeah. Now, so I tried to find an 833 4-speed Chrysler or new process, and I was having a great deal of difficulty finding one that was in my price range. And so what I decided to do was look into adapters to see if I could put a GM 4-speed, which I had a number of them kicking around. So I was very fortunate to find a guy down in California that had a bell housing custom cast by Transdapt back in the early to mid 60s. And it was NOS sitting on his shelf. And it was exactly that, which in this case, being a 62 with a standard transmission, it still retained the 61 direct drive starter, although they went to gear reduction on all the automatic cars in that year. But so I needed the large 172-tooth flywheel, large bell housing for the direct drive starter, but with the mounting flange for a GM transmission. And that's exactly what the fellow had. It took some adaptation for a release fork and various other pieces and parts, so that I could get the car on the road. The original 3-speed would have been okay with this being a 440 out of a late model, well, smog car. It wasn't drilled deep enough in the back of the crank for the pilot shaft of a Chrysler manual transmission. So I had to go with the GM, which has a shorter input shaft. I had to make a custom pilot bushing, and the bell housing, which is a neat piece in its own. If and when it comes off the car, it's just going to hang on my wall, because it's such an odd piece that, one, nobody else would ever want it, but two, it's just a really cool piece of hot rodding history.
Yeah, unique.
So I put Saginaw 4-speed into the car. Pardon me, I put 3 Saginaw 4-speeds into the car. This long ram setup, probably, I'm going to guess, a 20 to 25% increase in low to mid-range torque over the stock 4-barrel.
Wow.
And so it was extremely hard
And
on Saginaws, which are inherently not very strong.
And you grenaded a few.
So I broke many of them. And so I finally settled on a heavy-duty 3-speed from a friend's 67 Impala or Bel Air wagon, which you might see later on in this series. But when we put a 4-speed into his, I inherited his 3-speed. So this is actually a 3-speed manual out of a 67 Impala. And it's standing up remarkably well. Incidentally, because of the extreme difference in length of the transmission from a new Process 833 to a Chevy 3-speed standard, I had to lengthen my drive shaft by 9 inches, as I can't seem to find DOM tubing long enough to make a one-piece.
Yeah, that's super long. I think you were saying it's like 80 inches long. Or
it's unbelievably long and amazingly smooth. I did it myself in the garage, and that was close to 10 years ago, and I've had no trouble with it. Some people might be a little afraid, but I've broken transmissions on clutch dumps, and the transmission still holds, so or the drive shaft still holds. So I guess that's proof that it turned out not bad.
I have ridden in this car on the highway, and it runs as smooth as silk and super nice to ride in. So Kelvin, in true hot rod form, was able to. And I know there was other fabrication you had to do. The exhaust was a real nightmare to get that over torsion bars and starters and
clutch linkage and
create super long drive shafts to make everything work. But the end result is really cool, and you take this car everywhere. I know you drive it lots. You've been to events 2 hours away from here and have a lot of fun with it. So
it's pretty much daily driver and very reliable, unbelievably reliable.
Yeah. Which was really cool with the multi-carb setup and the long rams, and so yeah, I get it, and I really like the car. Very cool.
It's also still basically about 80% original paint, and I've found no evidence of any bodywork or painting or repair on any part of it other than the trunk lid, and it happens to be the worst part of the whole car.
Yeah.
So
otherwise, very, very clean, nice driver quality car. Yeah, the trunk's got a little bit of patina on it. Like you say, that was the only part that was maybe painted at one time, but very neat car. So, have we covered that now? We've covered that. Yeah. No, we've got another interesting car here. This was your dream car. I know you acquired this about. I'm going to get back here so we can see it. It's a '67 Chevelle, 396 4-speed car. It's a true SS 138 car. It's in the process of complete restoration. Kelvin's being very meticulous about making everything proper. Now, this is a one-of-one car. We'll explain that here real quick. Now, I believe you got a call from a friend. He said there's a '66 Chevelle for sale in the paper. Let's go look at it. And you were kind of like, well, I'm kind of...
Well, they did tell me it was a '67, but it was listed as a Malibu Sport Coupe. And I'd had a '67 138 car in the past, and I wanted another because it had been, unfortunately, in a pretty major accident. So I wasn't really interested in building a tribute or a clone. So I decided that I was going to hold off, and I told them, nope, not interested. They literally kidnapped me off of my couch within an hour after that and took me to look at this car, trying to talk me into buying it and turning it into an SS clone. When I got there, it looked like a '66. It had the '66 taillight panel and taillights. It also had a '66 front clip on it.
Right.
Which
unusual.
Kind of set me off. I thought that was unusual. But so I asked the guy, I said, you listed this as a '67. I said, I'm assuming that the serial number starts with 136177.
Expecting a Sport Coupe Malibu.
Yeah, and he said, well, no, actually, I think it's a 138177, which instantly my eyebrows went up because a 138 is what I was after. And as it turned out, on looking at the serial number and the data plate on the firewall, we found that it was indeed a 138 car, a 396. And on the data plate, A51, D55 bucket console, M20 being 4-speed.
Right. All the things you were actually looking for.
Exactly what I was looking for. So, you know, I mean, the guy didn't want any excessive amount of money. In fact, it was amazingly inexpensive. He had bought it as a parts car. He was restoring a Cutlass, and it was gutted beyond what you see here when I got it. It was just a shell, basically rolling. And
no drivetrain. Was the transmission with the car?
No transmission. No. The differential was a 68 12-bolt posi. With an aftermarket gear set, which was something that I didn't care for. No transmission with the car, no engine with the car, no interior with the car. It was a completely gutted, rolling car that was apparently in that state since prior to 1976, meaning that the car was less than 9 years old when it was gutted. To the best of the information I can get, the car had been stolen. And somebody was trying to disguise it as a 66, and so it changed over the sheet metal and what have you, trying to make that, you know. But I decided that I'd hang on to it. Now, that's 26 plus years ago. So it's been a long road to get to the point where I'm finally starting to get the thing together. So, lots of collecting parts.
Yeah, and I know you're being very meticulous. You got date-coded block, transmission.
Well, the block, it was as close as I could get. It's actually a 71-402, but the transmission is very near in the correct date. The differential is correct.
Right.
It came from a 67 Beaumont SD with a correct date. The alternator is correct date. My regulator is correct date. My intake manifold is correct. My manifolds are correct castings, exhaust manifolds.
Yeah, I know you spent a lot of time trying to find those. There was a lot of work invested in trying to get all the correct. And because of what the car is, unfortunately, the original stuff isn't here. He's having to work with what he has, and the car is very unique. We'll get into more of that here. Keep going, Calvin. Explain. Well, what this car really is and how it came to be.
When I tried to verify the car through GM at the time, which was 25 years ago, they
no internet or anything like that.
Well, there wasn't much available for information, so I had contacted GM Vintage Vehicle Services, and at that time they still had some paper record, which has all since been destroyed, and all they have is a production microfiche information. But in talking with the fellow there, George Zapora, I'm certain some of you have talked with him at some point, he had a great deal of difficulty verifying this car. The information that I was able to get was that the car had been special ordered prior to the release of the 67 models in May, June of 66.
Which is unusual, very early.
Yes, and that Fisher hadn't really, it's a known fact now, Fisher hadn't been supplying 138 bodies or the pieces like the big block hood, the things that make a 138 car a 138 until the end of December of 66.
And the color chart wasn't even out yet.
Yes.
So when that person ordered this car, they ordered off the 66 color chart. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so what had happened with that was this color was still available on the Pontiac, Buick, and Oldsmobile lines.
Right.
But it wasn't supposed to go on the Chevrolet line, which is a color called Verde Green. There were, now that I found, probably 2 so far, other 67 Chevelles that were painted this color. One Malibu and one big block car, but very unusual. Beaumonts, there are quite a number of them that were painted this color.
Yeah.
So I had been told that the car had been sent down the Pontiac Buick Olds line in order to paint it this color.
But lots of trouble. I think the dealership was sent the order back, what, 3 times or?
Yes, there were a few things that were unusual there. So the color was one. Secondly, the interior color, which wasn't something that they were particularly interested in building, because they felt that if the car was delivered and the customer didn't like it, it would be returned, and they didn't want that. So they kicked the order back a second time, saying, well, not only, okay, so we can paint this thing this color, but this gold interior's gotta go. But because the guy had special ordered it, he knew what he wanted, they had
and
to
paid in
return the
full.
order.
And paid in full, like he was, he knew what he wanted and paid in full, and was waiting for it. And there were some things like color and interior.
So the other unusual thing about it was that already by 1967, people had been seeing problems with their vinyl tops, which really sharpen the look of a car, but they would rust underneath. And so he wanted that look, but he didn't want the rust issues that come from it. So they were doing this thing at the dealership level where they were putting like almost a spackle finish, a textured finish on the roof with rubber stripping to make them look like a vinyl top, but without the problems that came with the corrosion and stuff from moisture getting underneath it.
Did they call them a imitation vinyl or what?
No, it was just a faux vinyl top. It was just a roof treatment that they did. But what they told me was that because of the extreme delays in building the car, the dealer here in Saskatoon that had ordered the car for their customer had been very insistent that that treatment be done at the factory, because it had to be done and delivered because the guy had waited long enough. So now I was told that it was one of the only ones, well, in fact, at that point, the only one that they had found some degree of documentation that it had been done at the factory, which is very unusual because it was supposed to be a dealer level thing.
Yeah.
That was hearsay, of course. There's no documentation left of that. But when we stripped the car to do the sheet metal work, we found evidence of lead fill. Now, what you have to understand is that when these cars, and some of you know more about it than I, but when these cars were built, if it was supposed to be a vinyl top car, it would have been delivered to the factory by Fisher Body with the pegs for trim and what have you in place for the options the car was supposed to get. In this case, being that it was going to be a dealer add-on, but now it had to be done at the factory, they had to install screw-on trim to hold that rear cove molding to separate the top from the body. It was a trim that they put on.
And a mistake was obviously made.
Oh, they drilled the holes so far off that the car actually had to be lead filled and even possibly repainted after the fact. And
a portion or all of,
we documented all of the errors in that. It was specifically on the left rear quarter where the holes for the moldings were way out of place and had to be lead filled. At that time, at the dealer, they wouldn't have gone to that length. So it's kind of, in a way, verification of what they had told me at GM.
Probably would have welded and body filled at the dealership, whereas this is actual lead, and there's evidence of that. We have pictures of that.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting.
Again, my thing is kind of high driver input cars. I like to manhandle them. So as the Chrysler is a manual transmission, manual steering, manual brakes, so is the Chevelle. So the fellow that ordered it, kind of surprised he went for a 325 horse 396 rather than a 350 horse. But it's manual steering, manual brakes, manual transmission. Again, just kind of like I like them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like to enjoy them, where I have to actually mean to drive them,
So this car is going back as original as you could possibly make it. There's a couple things that you've done that are make it a little bit of a better car, like you've powder coated the frame.
Yes. Yeah.
That's something that they wouldn't have done, but you've done that and it looks very good. Another thing you've done is, this is now a roller cam motor, is that correct?
It's a hydraulic roller, but it's a very, very mild, actually lift and duration is pretty much identical to a 350 horse 396. Just because I couldn't find anything milder. I would have gone for something closer to the 325, but This is all this is a Lunati roller in the smallest profile I could find.
Ah, oh, cool.
So there's a couple other things. I have upgraded to disc brakes because I've had 15 plus Chevelles over the years, and I found that the drum brakes, especially manual drum brakes, are well, inadequate at best. So I'm still going manual, but disc brakes.
Okay.
At least it's a little bit safer, as it were, because I intend to enjoy the car.
And drum in the rear.
And drum still in the rear, yeah.
Yeah, the way it was.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, so this is turning out really nice. I like what you've done here. It's very clean.
We went with like a rhino coat kind of a lining on the bottom of the car, and then painted in the body color. Partially for sound deadener, but also for durability, because the fellow that I had doing the sheet metal work, a good friend of mine, knows that I intend to drive the car.
Yeah, enjoy it.
Yes, it is a car after all, and it may be difficult for me to get adequate insurance on the car and still enjoy it, but I don't care. I'm building it to enjoy it, as it's my car, and I can pretty much do with it what I want.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's what they're made to drive.
Yeah.
Even though it is extremely rare, quite possibly one of one ever made, and very unique in its color combination. The spackled roof, the green color that wasn't available in '67, and then to top it off, very early in its life, I mean, we have no evidence for sure, you know, no documentation to say that the car was stolen early in its life, but it was then found in '66 trim, which it just adds to the unusual story this car has. And it's, man, if cars could talk, this one would have a lot to say, I'm sure. But I like what you're doing to it. One thing I do promise to, as Kelvin progresses here, and I'll have more videos on this, because this is really cool, and I like what he's doing here. It looks really good, Kelvin. So
thank you. It's something I've been looking forward to for a long time. So
another thing about Kelvin is he's a true hot rodder in every sense of the word, and he works on everybody's cars. He's got his own mobile business, old car doctor. So he spends a lot of time working on,
which is right there,
other people's cars. There's his logo right there on his back. So that's what he does. He works on older stuff, hot rods, muscle cars, customs, whatever have you. He specializes in, you know, wiring. Anybody and that could be anything. If you're doing an LS conversion, if you're just wiring up a you know, you're looking to wire up a hot rod, or you're converting to, you know, fuel injection, or that's his thing. He also is very meticulous in restoring gauges. If you want to install aftermarket gauges, Dakota Digital gauges, and you're having trouble getting that, he's the guy to see for that. He also restores older gauges, and incorporates a lot of neat things in those as well. So
I've got a number of projects on the go here for customers that as an example here, we've got some complete hydraulics for convertible top for a '66 Thunderbird, and all of the electrical harness to run all of the hydraulics. And I've restored the electrical end of it already, and now I'm just waiting for a couple lines to complete the hydraulics so that it can be reinstalled in the car. The dash here is actually a 1968 Coronet dash that I'm restoring for a fellow, and adding things like the reverse indicator light, and refurbishing and restoring his under dash harness, which is in the box right beside it. So this is the kind of things that I do. The tubs sitting in front of my glittery 6-cylinder are complete wiring and instrument cluster from a '69 GTX, and another wiring harness that needs restoration.
So Calvin's working on a lot of different stuff here, and when he does get time, he can build on his 67 Chevelle here.
I never get sick of working on the toys. People ask me, you do this stuff for a living, don't you ever get tired of it and have no interest in working on your own? That just doesn't happen. I'm just a hardcore gearhead, and whether it's a Mopar or a Ford or a GM or a Hudson or a Studebaker, Rambler, it doesn't matter to me. I'm about all of them.
And well versed in all of them. We as friends, a lot of our friends are in the automotive industry in one form or another. And we when we're stuck, when we're hitting a brick wall, doing whatever we're doing, we tend to, a lot of people will say, you can either click on Google or give Calvin a call, because he's a lot like Google. He's known to figure things out and make things work. So when we're stuck, that's the guy that we call.
Cat.
Yeah. And well, I prefer to call him the bus driver, because this guy's taking us all to school sometimes. So anyway, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As things progress here, I'm going to show more, and I do promise I've got a whack of friends that have really, really cool cars that you're going to see on this channel in the very near future. But yeah, that's it for today. Well, thanks very much, Calvin.
Hey, no problem.
Alrighty.